Welcome to the Customer Catalyst Conference 2021, to our session focusing on customer engagement with Peter Duffy, Chief Executive Officer, MoneySupermarket Group. With a simple, clear purpose to help households save money, MoneySupermarket relies on positive engagement with millions of consumers to drive their revenues. As the group grows and expands its brand offerings, how does customer engagement feature in the company's strategy? Charlie Dawson, a founding partner of the Foundation, a consultancy dedicated to helping organisations become customer-led, speaks with Peter.
Hello, I'm Charlie Dawson, founding partner of an organisation called the Foundation. We're a consultancy that helps people do a better job for their customers. I've recently written a book called The Customer Copernicus. It's all about this, and Peter Duffy, who I'm speaking to today, is central to that. It also led me to meet Chris Adlard and learn about the book that he's written, The Customer Catalyst. And we realised we're very much on the same page. As Chris puts it, we believe that today the only path to growth is ultimately customer-led. The product-led sales era is over. Now, one of the things that the Sea Change agenda identifies as mattering is engagement, the way the organisation engages with customers. And that's what I'm here to talk to Peter Duffy about today. So Peter, thank you very much for doing this. I've known you for a while. You're a true customer pioneer. I first met you when you were at Audi, and I've known you through EasyJet and Just Eat, and now a MoneySupermarket, where you're CEO. So the first thing I'd like to know from you is, for you, what does being customer-led really mean, and why does it matter?
I think it's really about hearing what your customers are telling you, whether they're saying that to you or whether that's just what they're feeling. They're easy words, actually, but it's actually much harder, I think, to do in practice. So it's about aligning an organisation to pick up all those data points, whether that's what the contact centre is hearing through the day-to-day conversations that customers are feeding back on the current service, whether it's the market research function who are looking at what customers are saying about the product or the future dimension of what that product could be, whether it's the product team who are kind of working up what this proposition should be and they're kind of working through very usability-based processes. Whatever it is, it's about hearing how customers are thinking generally and then specifically about what it is that you're offering.
So lots of organisations do lots of the sort of things you describe, but I wouldn't call most of those genuinely customer-led organisations. So what is it that makes the difference, to when an organisation really somehow responds to that in a productive way?
Well, I think it's doing something about it, and it's quite often hard to do something about it. I use EasyJet as a very good example because we did some very structured work that broke down the customer journey from booking through to the airport experience, to the on-flight experience, through to getting your bag off a carousel at the end. And then really tried to understand what customers wanted from each of those stages of the process versus what it was that we were delivering. And you can imagine at the start there was quite a delta there. And actually then changing the orientation of an organisation to begin to deliver against that customer agenda, the multiplicity of things, it isn't just one thing, it's probably a dozen, 2 dozen things in each of those big buckets, is a very, very tough thing to do. So it's about taking those theoretical projects, those research pieces of work, and actually converting them into real initiatives in the organisation, which is, I think, much harder to do in practice than perhaps we think when we embark on these things.
Yeah. So I'd certainly agree with that from what we've seen. I'm interested to know from you, if you stay with EasyJet, I mean, to begin with, what is it that makes it hard? It sounds so obvious. I mean, it sounds so obvious. Customers are telling you what to do, and you'll do better if you follow what they're saying. Why does it happen so infrequently?
Well, I think the best example at EasyJet is something called allocated seating. So the way low-cost airlines work is they make their money from the planes being in the sky. And that means that when they land, they really want to begin to turn them as quickly as possible. They want to take the bags off, they want to get the new bags on, they want to get the customers who are on the plane off, they get the new customers who are kind of joining for the next flight on. And the quicker you can do that, then the quicker the plane's back in the sky and you're making money again, essentially, in terms of that's how the model works. And ideally that would be circa 35 minutes in terms of making each of those turns happening. Now, on a typical flight of a sort of an hour and a half, just under 2 hours, you may get 8 of those in a day, which means you're getting those number of turns in between. And the collective thinking in the industry was that the fastest way to turn the plane, for example, was for customers to take the first available seat. This is when A number of us joined EasyJet at 2011 at the start of the big change program we put in place there.
Yeah.
And for all good reason, everybody thought that was the way to get more flights in the sky, to get cheaper prices, to make the whole thing work more efficiently. Now, the reality when you spoke to customers is that they hated that process of free seating. They hated the fact that people would rush to the plane, they would charge past you, that they would put blankets and bags over seats next to them to reserve them for people back in the queue. We could all remember what those days looked like. And what they really wanted was essentially the order that comes from perhaps a more legacy model, a seat allocated model, which is where we ultimately got to. But no one had really considered that because they thought it was more important that the plane actually went 8 times a day, and as a consequence the flight was cheaper because that's what the customer really, really wanted.
Yeah, and I guess people had voted with their feet and cheap flights were certainly very popular.
And that was true, wasn't it? It was absolutely true. But actually when you began to talk to customers, the real challenge was how do you do both?
Yeah.
How do you make it work in the way that they would like it to work, plus give them that efficiency that drives those cheap prices? So that became the challenge for the organisation. Now, that was a really, really tough thing to do. It was tough to convince the board. It was tough to convince operational colleagues that was the right thing to do. It was tough to prove that was the right thing to do, because when you're geared up to make something work in one way, then it doesn't naturally just work in the other way without a lot of energy and a lot of effort. And so the operational community had to change so many processes and ways of doing things to begin to make that work in the way that the consumer wanted. Yet once we did that and once we successfully implemented it, it added over £100 million to the bottom line in the first year. The revenue economics were there because the customer said, not only do I want this, I'm prepared to pay for it.
Right.
And so there was a complete linkage between revenue generation and meeting customer needs. But it's hard to do that in practice.
Yeah. So I was intrigued to know then maybe at EasyJet, what was it that meant that you did respond? So I guess you heard something, and I'm sure it wasn't the first time that had been heard as a piece of feedback, but somehow, against all the inconvenience that you described, this team at EasyJet decided that you would have a go at doing it. And again, I'm sure before you did it, you didn't know you were going to succeed. So where the hell did that confidence or belief or determination or what have you, where did it come from?
Well, I think it's about leadership from the CEO.
Right.
So the CEO has to set that customer agenda, has to say, we're going to listen to our customers and we're going to do the things that they tell us are important. Because it's only by then connecting all the different parts of the organisation to deliver against that you're going to get to success. And honestly, that was so complicated. There would have been so many opportunities to kind of just get off that bus and say, do you know what, this is too hard, we're not going to do it.
Yeah.
Let's continue doing it in the way that it's always been done. It's that leadership from the CEO that we had as a team at EasyJet. It's that team working together with that common goal that really makes it happen. And again, they're really easy words to say.
Yeah.
It's making that happen in practice that I think is the challenge.
Yeah. So that makes it sound like it's less about the cleverness of the listening and more about the response. But I guess at EasyJet over time, you did quite a few different things, that followed that, and there were other things that required, a bit more detail. So the food and beverage changes that you made, which ended up looking to me really smart, and it all became a lot more desirable, a lot more premium, and so on. How did you, again, where did you get the sort of inspiration or the guidance to do that? And how much of that was sort of listening to customers, and how much was just innovating, inspired by something else?
No, it's all about listening to customers. Right. So, the great piece of analysis that I think surprised me when I first joined EasyJet is that as a profile at the highest level, they were as ABC1 as British Airways, the customer base. And actually, when you dug into that, you found out that a very significant percentage of customers were second homeowners. And of course, that's why they were flying on a low-cost airline, because they were going perhaps half a dozen times a year. They were buying 4 or 5 seats. They were buying 60, 70, 80 seats. And you then look at who those consumers are and what they're wanting from the flight. And maybe they don't want, the grimmest gin. And maybe they don't want the cheapest crisp brand. Maybe they're wanting something which is, protein rich. And we found that when we began to switch to sort of known and famous brands, that we drove success, switching onto Bombay Sapphire, putting Hendrix on, switching to Fever Tree and putting Coca-Cola on. We're just, the things that you and I would perhaps want to buy in a bar, and all of a sudden we were allowing you to buy it on the plane. And it turned out to be successful. So it is about looking at data and who your customers are, and then what they're asking you for, and then saying, is your proposition matching that? And to be frank, it wasn't, and we did well by just aligning it to what our customers were wanting us to do.
Yeah, so I guess so there's some factual input that helped you see things in a particular way, but then also a sort of sense of tuning in then to who those people are and to imagine what else they want in the world. So maybe it'd be interesting to think about Just Eat. So I know at Just Eat, I mean, data was important at EasyJet, but it was important to another level at Just Eat. How did things work there? How did and you were there for a little while. How did things sort of evolve, and how receptive to sort of customer feedback and listening was that organisation?
So the big difference between Just Eat and EasyJet is there are no people involved at Just Eat. It's a pure digital platform.
Right.
It's just an app or a website that the customer's interacting with. So in the airline, obviously you have people to check your bag in, you have crew on the plane, you have the cockpit team. There are people all through the process to smooth that over. With Just Eat, it is just the product that you have in front of you. And I think if I look at when I joined, it was a brilliant product because it showed you all the restaurants in your area. But essentially, it was like the yellow pages as was. They may as well have been listed alphabetically. So the big thing that we did was get customer data to begin to drive what those restaurant suggestions were to you. So for example, something very boring called menu ontology, but what we did is we dug into all our data and we understood what you were buying. And we could then work out if you were a vegetarian, or perhaps you were buying halal meat products, or maybe that you were responding to value offers, or maybe you liked the same restaurant and went back to it on the same day every time. Maybe we could tempt you to try something new. Maybe we were never going to get you to try something new because you knew what you liked. The point is that the interface then began to change based on your individual buying behavior, and then in turn what people like you also did. So before that, if you and I lived next door to each other, we would have just seen the same restaurants in the same order. So nothing changed in terms of the content essentially on that. Obviously we put a lot more restaurants on the platform, but it was just how we began to present it based on customer information and customer data. And I think for many modern businesses, data kind of equals customer, because that is the way we really understand what customers are doing, are telling us that they want, and how effectively you can utilize that data to begin to really personalize it around different customer groups, cohorts, down to really what you're wanting as an individual rather than as a group of people. It is the difference between success and mediocrity.
Yeah, okay, so that listening and analysis, or that analysis of the data, is really important. But I guess the direction you were going in, would you describe that as sort of obvious? Like you weren't having conversations with customers and a light bulb went on saying we should do this. I mean, I love Jeff Bezos describes nobody's ever going to ask for less choice with slower delivery times at higher prices. So he doesn't need to keep on asking whether people want those things. If you can keep on innovating to get more choice at lower prices with faster delivery, you're going to do well. Is it a bit like that? I mean,
yeah. So I think there's two very different systems really. You look at EasyJet; it's quite a defined model, and it's how do we spec the product in a way that delivers against customer needs. Yes, that exists for Just Eat. But actually, I'm never going to be able to predict how hungry you are or what you fancy eating on a Tuesday evening. So I had to kind of create a framework which algorithmically will begin to put in front of you relevant suggestions that you think are kind of good for you. And so you're not trying to second guess. What you're trying to do is to kind of create a system where the data becomes really smart in suggesting to you things that are relevant. It's a slightly different thing.
Yeah, slightly more on firm ground, concrete and so on.
And that's where the Bezos, I think, comment kind of comes into its own really, because he's saying pour more choice in, and then the system will then begin to help the customer route to the thing that they really want.
And was there a role for any more human sort of customer learning or influence in Just Eat? And I'm actually, when I'm saying customer, I'm maybe thinking about both the buyer and also the sort of restaurant owners, because I know you were there through the whole COVID crisis, and that was a tremendously difficult period for restaurant owners in particular. And I mean, did it matter that people at Just Eat sort of empathised in any way with their plight, or did that happen naturally, and actually it was more about just knowing what matters and trying to be innovative? Or
No, I think the reason that Just Eat was a successful business was something called Feet on the Street. We had teams of people who would actually go out and talk to restaurateurs and would actually manage a patch. So the pandemic is a great example of that. One of the things that we did as a leadership team was say, government support is going to take some time to kick off. So what do we do to commissions now, today, this week, to begin to help restaurants? So whilst restaurants ultimately did very well from the pandemic, at the start quite a number went offline because they didn't understand what it meant. They had staffing issues, a series of different reasons why. So we went straight into cutting commissions for a period of time to just begin to help and support them, take a level of cost out of the business, and to essentially say we're on your side. And then as the business picked up again, normal service kind of could begin to resume in that way. Now that is all about listening to restaurants. It's Just Eat is a marketplace, two-sided marketplace. So you have customers and you have providers, you have restaurants. How are you helping both of them? And I think to the first part of your question, listening to customers in a very generic way, looking at how they're interacting with the product, doing all that good usability work, saying, we've come up with something that's quite smart here. But how are you understanding that? How is the language working? Is that actually doing what you would expect it to do in the way that you would expect it? Do you want to see it being sorted in that way? Do you want to have alternative views?
Right.
And how do we give you all those choices? That can only be done by a more sort of, traditional qualitative approach where you sit and you work with customers one-on-one. We would go out to customers' homes and just sit in their environment as a leadership team and begin to look at how they interact. Go and order some food now. How do you do it? How does that begin to work? Where are you eating? Are you sitting at the dining table? Are you sitting on the floor? Are you sitting in front of a TV on the sofa? How does all that work? I think understanding the consumer context of how they're using your product and what's working and what isn't working for them is critical. And there is no one methodology that takes you to that answer. You've just got to use a range of different things to get there.
So what's the thing that just thinking about that seems to matter most? Because it feels like there's a curiosity and there's a priority. I mean, it sounds in your mind like there's no question that this is really important to how a business runs and whether a business succeeds. It's not something that one of the functions over there does a little bit of. It's central. But I know from experience that's not how lots of organisations operate. How do you get that? So where do you even personally get that sense of why it matters that much?
Yeah, well, if you start from the proposition that there's no successful business that isn't trying to resolve some unmet customer need, then that's where it kind of comes from, isn't it?
Yeah.
And you never really get there because customer demands and needs change and they improve all the time. So when businesses start off, people say, well, this isn't happening, so I'm going to solve that problem for customers, and that's going to be what my kind of proposition is. Well, any current live business just has to stay current and live to those problems as they begin to change, and of course they do begin to change. There was a time when none of us had broadband. We've all got broadband now. The issue is the quality of the broadband or the service of the broadband. They're the unmet customer needs which need resolution, and it's customers sort of staying fresh to all of that. If you look at MoneySupermarket Group now, we're all about how we help households save money. Well, there are many different ways we can help you save money. We have a brand called Money Saving Expert, Martin Lewis. That's all about giving you advice to save money. We've got MoneySupermarket. That's all about how we make it really simple for you to save money, because you can go onto a site, you can click through and just sort it all out in one location. And then we've just bought a company called Quidco, which is all about giving you cash back on saving, which is essentially how you earn money through spending. There are different ways to solve the same customer problem, and I think just an organisation has to stay live to each of those and hear what the customers are saying about each of them and then adapt accordingly.
Yeah, okay, and listen and join them up somehow. So MoneySupermarket, it'd be good to just know a bit more about MoneySupermarket, because I guess the EasyJet and Just Eat, I guess there's an element of sort of with hindsight, you can talk about what happened and you know the effect that you got to. I guess you're a bit more in the middle of it here. So how did the culture in relation to customers look when you first arrived? And are there a few things that you've done that feel like they might have changed things, decisively?
Well, what is amazing about this group is its mission, which is to help households save money. And if you wander around to any of our sites, it just bubbles up really quickly. You talk to any of our people, it's kind of the reason why they get out of bed. It's the reason why they join the organisation. And so, there was nothing that needed to be done there. Honestly, it's kind of hold them back from kind of helping. That's what everybody has kind of joined this organisation to do. But actually, some of our processes were a bit out of date. So, I would observe where we were with data and the ability to respond to what customers are doing kind of instantly was not where it would have been in Just Eat, for example. So we can begin to do things to just improve the technology platform and some of the ways of working in terms of how that is all set up. But the brands are kind of what makes it. The customer doesn't care about any of that. That's our gig to kind of get all that sorted out. It's the brands and how compelling and relevant they are for consumers that really makes a difference. And I think that's what makes this group special. So money saving expert Martin Lewis, the most trusted brand in financial services over any big bank. People trust what Martin says and what that organisation is sort of telling customers, and how we helped during the pandemic just give people general advice on at the time what things like furlough meant, because nobody was born knowing what that meant.
That was a bizarre word.
There had to be a lot of help to begin to support people. And as I say, with MoneySupermarket in a similar way, how do we move price comparison from something which has become quite generic across the existing brands to something which is much more personalised? And how do we really make it very, very easy for you to begin to switch, and how we're using data to make that much smarter? And as I say, then adding Quidco on as a different way of doing that again. I think it's a really exciting journey that we're on.
Yeah. How do you sort of personally stay in touch and sort of get a sense? Like you're chief exec, and I guess in writing the Customer Copernicus recently, we drew an analogy. As an organisation is like a planet. And customers are in space, and people serving customers are sort of on the surface of the planet, and the people running it are right at the core of the planet. And literally, as they look out, there are layers of stuff that get in the way, and it's really hard to see what's going on and to empathise. And you've got shareholders and colleague challenges and competitors that do things that are inconvenient. So how do you stay in touch? How do you keep a sense of it?
Yeah, so I think being conscious of that is the first thing that you have to do. And as you described, there are just so many drivers on people's time. If you work in a big complex organisation, there are so many different stakeholders. There is so much which is sort of non-customer that you're going to have to make the time for the customer and push that segment out. You're going to have to really focus on that. I was in a session with our customer contact team just a couple of days ago, and like any customer contact team, they say we've got so much that we can tell the rest of the organisation that we don't think you're hearing, and my job is to kind of connect them, and my job is to kind of make sure that what our customers are saying does get heard by the product people, does get heard by different parts of the organisation. I think we're pretty good at it, but you can always be better, can't you, in terms of how those things work. So I think the first thing is just to be conscious of that and to say, how in touch am I with the customer-facing parts of this organisation, whether that be the people who are running market research programs, or the people who are talking to customers directly, or the people who are talking to providers, understanding what those issues are, because that has to be a big percentage of the time.
Yeah. I remember asking someone years ago how it was someone else that was in a senior position that was well in touch with customers. I remember asking how they did it, how they made time for it, and he said he thought about it the other way around, like how could he do his job without doing that? And that was one way, at least, that someone got it sort of wedged in. Are there any sort of watch outs? So one of the things, the famous old analogy that, if Henry Ford had asked what people wanted, they'd have wanted a faster horse, sort of thing. As customers, we don't always know. We certainly don't know what's possible, and sometimes we don't even sort of know what we really want, because we're so used to buying, like we're buying ready meals. The idea of nice food quickly and Just Eat being an answer to that is not one you get to. Sometimes people ask for things that are, I don't know, contradictory or maybe even unhelpful. So how do you sort of work out? Do you listen to everything? Do you edit it? How do you edit what people say? How do you interpret it?
I think you have to listen to everything, and you have to prioritise stuff.
Yeah.
And you prioritise based on what's important, but also what can you do? What can be delivered? And so, there's a sort of cadence of delivery that comes over time. Some things are quite big and just take longer to land. Some things are relatively easy and you can get to faster. But I think it's that sort of runway of delivery really that becomes important. How does that change program begin to look over time? I think a lot is made of that. Customers don't necessarily know what they want. I'm not sure I always kind of believe that. Customers want it to be efficient. They kind of want it to work in the way they think it should work. Going back to the airline, one of the things that I would observe when I joined, when the team sort of started at EasyJet, is there was a series of practices that took customers by surprise. We called them gotchas. They were sort of charges which were levied on you that you would have no idea that you were going to trip up and fall foul of until that happened to you. And unsurprisingly, customers were really fed up with that. But of course, that made, in those days, an awful lot of money. So to begin to wean the organisation off that sort of way of behaving and saying, look, be really upfront with the customer. Tell them how much it's going to cost. Tell them what they're going to pay, when they're going to pay it, and let them make the choice. And let them decide if that's good value or not. And if they don't think it's good value, then change the product in terms of making it good value. That philosophically is where you have to begin to get to. And so, when we built our app, we tried to enable you to book a flight within 30 seconds. No one was saying, I want to book a flight within 30 seconds. But what that meant is you wanted it just to be really efficient and be able to go through and make it really simple.
Yeah.
Well, that's what the customer wants in terms of just make it really easy.
Yeah.
So I just think you can make quite a lot out of this sort of unknown customer demand, when actually for many organisations, what the customer is wanting you to do is probably actually quite clear.
Yeah. I often think about it actually as defining what's being customer-led as having these two parts, really understanding what customers value. So what are the problems they're really trying to solve, or the outcomes they really want, and then how can you help them solve those problems or get to those outcomes in new and better ways. The second bit is inventive, and so the probably responsibilities for you. The first bit is a bit what you're describing, I think, which is about going deeper than what someone might say immediately. You ask a question, and I guess if you'd asked someone about buying a ticket, they certainly would have wanted a better process, but they might, but you could see if fundamentally people want something where their expectations are dead clear and it matches them and so on. And actually you don't, again, it's like the Jeff Bezos thing, you don't need to keep on asking whether that's true, whether that's still true.
Yeah. So again, the airline is a very good example of that. We did a whole load of work, quite complex sort of customer satisfaction, multivariate analysis work, but looked at how important individual components of the overall process were. And actually, the plane taking off and landing on time was by far and away the most important thing. So what that meant is we could have a brilliant booking experience, and we did have a brilliant booking experience, but it would only be so important in terms of how good that EasyJet experience was. But if you look at the whole landing on time, which is, we can all understand is really kind of critical to kind of how good that is. If we got that wrong, then people would say the sandwiches didn't taste as nice, that the crew weren't as friendly, that the plane was chilly, all that sort of stuff. It would completely cloud the view of the brand overall. So that becomes the most important thing. Yeah. Now, actually getting that to happen is really tough. Yeah. Much easier to build a nice new website and say we're focusing over here. But getting the planes to land on time was, the big shift which our operational colleagues did fantastically across the period of time that we were there, but was really, really difficult to make happen day in, day out. And of course, you don't get it right all the time. Yeah. So when you don't get that right, how do you handle that, and how does that all begin to work from a customer point of view as well? Yeah. But that's what customer-centric is being. And perhaps sometimes I would observe that organisations tend to do the easiest thing and herald that as a customer example, when actually it's the really tough things that consumers want that will genuinely make the difference, and make the difference ultimately to the bottom line. Yeah,
and if there are people sort of watching this that are, I don't know, in organisations that are earlier in the journey than some that you might have been describing, are there tips or clues that you'd give for things that can help to begin with? So one of the things I remember you telling me about EasyJet was that one of the things that Carolyn did was people used to refer to planes being sort of delayed, and she'd started insisting on describing there were 180 passengers, 180 people were delayed in Madrid, and that just seemed to be like a very subtle language. It sounds like a language thing, but it's more than that.
Oh, no, it was great. So a plane has been delayed, and Carolyn would go, isn't that 180 passengers or customers who've been delayed. So 1 versus 100, just the quantum in terms of the impact, and helping people begin to understand that, I kind of think is critical. So there is something about the customer outcome and that becoming the KPI and then the nomenclature within the organisation that I think is quite critical. I think the other thing I'd say is it's quite easy to tell these stories looking through the rearview mirror, and it's actually quite hard to do them in reality.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't always feel easy, and
Right.
it doesn't always feel that you're doing the right thing. And my example earlier about allocated seating, many opportunities when it would have just been easier for us all to get off that bus and say too difficult to begin to do it, but we kept going and we kept doing it because it felt like the right thing to do with customers, and it then began to win through as a result of that. So that would be my biggest suggestion is you can be brave. It doesn't always feel great as you're doing it. It feels really challenging, really difficult. But actually sticking with the customer and delivering what the customer wants, I think has to be the surefire way to commercial success tomorrow. I can't think of too many examples of commercially successful businesses that don't really deliver what consumers want. There may be some we could kind of point to, but by and large, certainly new businesses who are coming and disrupting existing markets are meeting unmet customer demands in ways that aren't currently being met by the existing incumbents.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that's a really good note to leave us on. So I think if you're watching, try and have that conviction and that belief that this is the right way, and it might be hard yards, but it's worth it when you get there in the end.
Brilliant. Good to catch up, Charlie.
Thank you, Peter.
Take care.